Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Om Hari Om. Namaste, everyone, and welcome to our latest live stream. It is absolutely wonderful to be here with you all. And for those who are here for the very first time, and I'm sorry, give me one moment, I'm just checking to make 100% sure that we're actually working, that things are actually working. Very good. And just to make sure, actually, if people would not mind, can I please have someone in the chat just confirm that you can see me, that you can hear me, etc., before I proceed? Because once in a while we do have a little bit of a problem. We have not recently had a problem, but again, things do indeed happen. So I just want to make sure that everyone can indeed see me and hear me in every way. So again, before we proceed, if everyone can please just let me know that you can see and hear me. Very good. All right. It looks like things are okay. Wonderful. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, again, as I was saying, to get back to what I was saying a moment ago, thank you all very much for being here. It is absolutely wonderful to be here again with you on this Monday. For those of you who are somewhat new, this is something that we do every Monday. It's a live stream, what is called satsangha, and that is a spiritual gathering in which we delve very deeply into the religious tradition known as Sanatana Dharma, the eternal natural way, sometimes called Hinduism. Hinduism is not the correct term, unfortunately, for this path, though sometimes out of convenience we will call ourselves Hindu. The truth of the matter is what we practice is Sanatana Dharma. And this is brought to you by a movement known as the International Sanatana Dharma Society. If you have not yet done so, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Please like this video when you can. And in addition to that, please feel free to visit our website, dharmacentral.com, and you'll see that many of our books are available there, that we have an email list that you can join, etc. And with that, I'm going to dive into what will be the talk for today. As always, I would ask that you please not ask any questions until I signal to you that the time has come for questions and answers. Because if you ask questions before then, I guarantee I'm not going to see them, because I don't really look at the chat in any way until it's time for questions and answers. So don't worry, I'll let you know when that time comes. And with that, we're going to dive into the talk for today. And this is going to be a very special and truthfully a very important talk. We're going to be talking about understanding the actual meaning of AUM, A-U-M. This is one of the most important, not just mantras. It certainly is a mantra in and of itself, but more than this, metaphysically, this is one of the most important sound vibrations in existence. Sometimes this word is misspelled OM, and there are very technical reasons for why that is the case. In Vedic Sanskrit, as opposed to either classical Sanskrit or what a lot of more modern people do when they try to spell this word, in Vedic Sanskrit, which is the oldest layer of Sanskrit, it is AUM. That is precisely how it is spelt and pronounced in Roman transliterated form. So that being the case, this is what we're going to be talking about, is Om. Now, you know, for any of you who have studied Sanatana Dharma either a little bit or to a very great degree, you know that this is an omnipresent sound vibration. And when I say omnipresent, we're not even talking about metaphysically yet. I'm talking about within the corpus of the Vedic scriptures. We find Om all throughout the Vedic scriptures. We find this in the Brahmana and Aranyaka literature, certainly all throughout the Upanishads. We find this sound vibration certainly the Puranas, and on and on. In Bhagavad Gita, it's mentioned there. So we find this mantra, again, omnipresent all throughout the Vedic scriptures. Indeed, many of the, let's say, passages of the Upanishads, many of the Upanishads themselves begin with Om and end with Om. First you say Om, then you will recite the entire Upanishad, and then again it ends with Om. We know that there are many important mantras that have Om within them. So, for example, the most obvious is the mantra that we stress in the International Sanatana Dharma Society, Om Namo Narayanaya, which again begins with Om. But then there's the Gayatri mantra, which begins with Om, and on and on and on. So, this being the case, simply looking alone at the again, omnipresent feature of this mantra all throughout the Vedic scriptures, that alone should give us a very good inkling as far as how important this mantra actually is. Now, the question is, why is this mantra of such importance? What is this mantra? What is this sound vibration? What is it not? Because, of course, as is always the case, very sadly, when dealing with even some of the most basic, the most rudimentary, the most fundamental concepts, ideas, even words that are found in Sanatana Dharma, sadly, we need to often get rid of a lot of misconceptions, in addition to then positively explaining, well, what does X thing mean? What is yoga? What is meditation? What is bhakti? What is karma? Etc., etc., etc. Same thing with Om. Sadly, a lot of New Age, truly New Age, misunderstandings have crept into the explanation of what is Om. Sadly, even within the Hindu world, the Hindu community, many people come somewhat close to understanding what Om actually is, but very rarely do they actually hit the mark and truly understand what is the significance of this mantra. So this is what we're going to explore today. And let me just begin by saying this. One of these misconceptions, very sadly, exists within modern Vaishnava circles. One of these misunderstandings as far as the nature of, again, this mantra, AUM, Om. And I've encountered this all my life because I've been a Vaishnava for the vast majority of my life consciously. 45 years or so I've been a Vaishnava. And sadly, I've seen this among many modern Vaishnavas, that they will claim that, oh, we shouldn't even recite Om because, oh, it is appealing specifically to the impersonal aspect of God. For any of you out there who, for example, you've been in ISKCON or any sort of modern Vaishnava movement or organization, you've heard this, haven't you? You've heard things like this, that Om is appealing to, oh, the impersonal aspect of God. Nonsense. This simply is not true. Again, this is why I prefaced everything that I was saying by first and foremost explaining that this mantra is found all throughout the Vedic scriptures, everywhere throughout the Vedic scriptures. So this being the case, it is indeed a mantra that has been seen historically by all teachers, all acharyas, all rishis, yogis, etc. of the Vedic tradition as being something that is crucial. This includes the Vaishnava acharyas. So again, the Vedic scriptures would not emphasize the importance of this mantra if it were not the case that we should take it in a very important way, that we should take it as something very serious. So the idea, again, that Om is referring to the impersonal aspect of God, no, that's absolute nonsense. This indeed is also why with many so-called Vaishnava mantras, really what are mantras appealing to the personal aspect of God, you also have Om. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Vishnave, Om Namo Narayanaya, etc., etc., etc. That Om element is there. So indeed, this is one of the misconceptions that we need to eliminate. Om, rather than simply, again, appealing to the quote-unquote impersonal aspect of God, in actuality, what Om is actually doing is, it is a name of God. It is an appellation of God. It is something that is referring very specifically to God, just as any other name of God, just as Krishna or Narayan or Govinda, etc., etc., etc. So, now, all that being said, let me now go into these 3 verses that we're going to be looking at. And these are 3 very nice, very important verses. And these are all specifically from the Upanishads. And these deal very specifically with what is the nature of Om, how it is of importance, etc. So with that, let's begin first and foremost with the Prashna Upanishad. And this is the Prashna Upanishad 5, verses 6 and 7. So with that, let's dive into this. And very, very nice verse that explains the importance of Om. By virtue of a little understanding of Om, a person returns to earth after death. By virtue of a greater understanding, he attains to the celestial sphere. By virtue of a complete understanding, he learns what is known only to the seers, the rishis. The sage, with the help of Om, reaches Brahman, the fearless, the undecaying, the immortal. So very, very beautiful, very interesting verse. To some people, even a little bit of a mysterious verse as far as, what specifically is this verse trying to convey? And the truth of the matter is, this verse is a lot more, let's say, straightforward than people would understand upon a first reading of this verse. But let's go through this. This verse is essentially explaining how Om is something that is indeed objective. It has an objective reality, but we will benefit from that reality of Om in accordance with our approach to it, our understanding of it, etc. Now, all that as a summation, let's go through this a little bit. By virtue of a little understanding of Om, a person returns to earth after death. Now, this is pretty straightforward, of course. What's being explained here is that if a person's understanding of Om is very cursory, is very, very basic, very simple, that is, again, they have kind of a Wikipedia explanation of what is the nature of Om. For people who have been with me for some time, you know I've told you multiple times, if you want to learn pretty much anything about Sanatana Dharma, do not go to Wikipedia. Because your understanding of Sanatana Dharma will not only be extremely simplistic, but in many cases wrong, unfortunately, because Wikipedia is not a very good source. But again, for those individuals who, let's say, they have somewhat of a Wikipedia understanding of Om, maybe even for those individuals who they may indeed consider themselves Hindus, followers of Sanatana Dharma, etc. And once in a blue moon, they will recite Om when saying a prayer or a mantra, or listen as a priest is doing a prayer or mantra, and they'll hear Om. For such an individual, their understanding of Om is very, very little. It is not a very great understanding, and neither is the practice of this mantra Om. So thus, what this verse is explaining is that for such a person, they return to earth upon death. In other words, they are reincarnated, and they come back to where they started off, because again, their understanding of this mantra is very small. Now let's go on. By virtue of a greater understanding, he attains to the celestial sphere. Now, this is interesting. Now, this is talking about a second category of person. And who is this person? This is someone who is what is called a karmakandi. Karmakandi. And this is a very technical term. What this means is an individual who is quote-unquote religious, but their goal is not necessarily to know God. Rather, their goal is in almost a materialistic way, a type of spiritual materialism. Their goal is to elevate themselves within the context of the material world. But again, not necessarily to know God, but still, because they are religious and thus probably engaged in a lot of ritual in which they are meditating upon the sound vibration of Om, and their understanding is a little bit better than just the typical individual. What happens with such a person? They are elevated to Svarga. They are elevated to the heavenly realms, to the realm where there are the gods. So thus this says, by a greater understanding, he attains the celestial sphere. That is, he indeed, when he passes away, he is with the gods. So now let's go on. By virtue of a complete understanding, he learns what is known only to the rishis, only to the seers. Now, this part, of course, this third clause, this third sentence, is very, very important. With this category of person, we're talking about someone who indeed has a complete and authentic understanding of what is the nature of Om, in accordance with the Vedic scriptures, the teachings of the Acharyas, that person's own guru, etc. And more, this is the individual who very specifically is not just a typical person who kind of has a curiosity and wants to read on Wikipedia, oh, what is this Om all about? More, it's not merely someone who, again, is what's called a karma kandi, that is someone who simply wants to elevate themselves and become a god, so a type of spiritual materialism. But rather, this is the individual who truly wants to know the highest, who truly wants to know God. And that being the case, the actual relationship that they have with this mantra, with Om, is that indeed they understand that it is a name of God, and thus they meditate upon that name in such a way. Now, what happens with such a person? It says here that with that complete understanding, that person learns what is known only to the seers, only to the rishis. In other words, that person has true wisdom. That person has true spiritual wisdom. That person who has the most complete understanding of what is the nature of Om. And now, let's go on to what is the very last sentence that is here in this verse. And it says, the sage, with the help of Om, reaches Brahman, the fearless, the undecaying, the immortal. So now, of course, what's being spoken of is the individual in the third category. That is the individual who is indeed a sage, who indeed wants to know God, and who thus is meditating upon Om with this aim in mind. Well, what happens with such a person? Well, that person, the sage, with the help of Om, that is meditating upon Om, reaches Brahman. And again, Brahman is not merely the quote-unquote impersonal aspect of God. Rather, it is the philosophical term for Narayana. So this is an individual who wishes to know God, and what happens is they indeed reach God. They indeed know God. And then it's very nice how it gives these qualifiers for what is the nature of Brahman, what is the nature of God, of Narayana, of Krishna. And it says, the fearless, that God has no fear, the undecaying. And what is meant by that? That God is not composed of parts. And then finally, the immortal, so God who is eternal. Now, all this being said, I do want to speak just a little bit about, indeed, what is the actual nature of this mantra, and why is this mantra so important? Well, to explain what is in actuality metaphysically a very deep subject in the quickest way possible, in a small nutshell, essentially, the idea is that Om is indeed one of the names of God. It is also a sound vibration, but very specifically, this very specific sound vibration, this specific name of God, has a functional aspect. And that is that it is this name of God that upholds all reality. It is responsible for creation, so thus the very first sound, in fact the very first thing that exists within any given universe is indeed this sound vibration Om. It is this sound vibration that is used later to create the universe. It is this sound vibration that interpenetrates all of reality, so thus is everywhere. So in a way, one could say that this is the very sound of the omnipresence of God himself. In other words, if one could hear God all around us at all times, what we would hear would be Om. This would be the very sound vibration that we would hear. So this is what Om represents, is quite literally the omnipresence of God, God being within all things. Very good. So with that being said, let's go on please to the next verse, because we have 3 verses to go through. And we don't have all the time in the world. I tried to limit things to an hour, and I'm going to try to be very strict today and limit things to an hour. The next verse that we're going to be looking at is from Mundaka Upanishad 2 verses 3 and 4. And this is how this beautiful verse, very well-known verse actually, this is how this verse proceeds. Affix to the Upanishad, which is the incomparable bow, the sharp arrow of devotional worship. Then, with mind absorbed and heart melted in love, draw the arrow and hit the mark, the imperishable Brahman, or God. Om is the bow, the arrow is the individual being, and Brahman is the target. With a tranquil heart, take aim. Loose the arrow of yourself in him, even as the arrow is lost in the target. Beautiful, truly beautiful verse, where it's using this analogy of a bow and arrow, of a bow, an arrow, and the target. So let's go through this. This doesn't require a lot of explanation because it's quite clear what this verse is saying, but still, let's go through it a little bit. First of all, affix to the Upanishad, which is the incomparable bow. So 2 things are compared to the bow. First, the Upanishad itself, the Upanishads, but then later on, Om also is considered to be the bow. But let's deal with what's being said right here first. Affix to the Upanishad, which is the incomparable bow, the sharp arrow of devotional worship. So first of all, devotional worship or bhakti is considered to be the arrow. So it is that thing which we are going to now use as a vehicle by which we can know the absolute. Now let's go on a little bit more. Then with mind absorbed and heart melted in love, draw the arrow and hit the mark, the imperishable Brahman. So again, the target, the mark is God. This is the goal. This is what we wish to know. Now let's go on a little bit more. And this part is the most important part. Om is the bow. So now it's describing Om itself, this mantra, as the bow. The arrow, interestingly, the arrow is the individual being. The arrow is the Atman. And then Brahman is the target. So this part here is the most important part of this entire verse, where it's explaining very, very nicely how the conveyance itself is indeed Om. Om is the bow, so it's the thing by which we transport ourselves. We ourselves, the Atman, we're like the arrow. We are presently in illusion. We are presently in the material world, and we want to, in a way, not literally, of course, but in a way transport ourselves to another place, to the spiritual realm. So we ourselves, the Atman, we are compared to that arrow. And then finally, again, God is the target. God is the target. And now finally, let's look at this very, last 2 verses. With a tranquil heart, take aim. This is very nice, this very short verse actually, where it's explaining that, first of all, the process has been explained, that we will use the mantra Om in order to bring the Atman to God. But now it explains that understanding that process, it is important to have a tranquil heart. That is, it's important to be at peace. It's important to be an individual who is detached, who has the mindset, the behavior of a yogi in order to engage in this very process itself. And then finally, lose the arrow of yourself in him, even as the arrow is lost in the target. So in the same way that, of course, when the arrow hits the target, it affixes itself to that target. It doesn't just kind of touch the target. Rather, it truly affixes itself to the target to the point where it is there. And you're not going to, unless with a lot of effort, you're not going to remove that arrow from the target. In the same way, this is saying that we are to do the same things with ourselves and God. We are to affix ourselves to God in a very sturdy sort of way, in such a way that indeed we don't fall back down into illusion. So again, beautiful verse from Mundaka Upanishad. And now let's go to the very last verse that we're going to look at. And this also is from Mundaka Upanishad because it continues to talk about Om for some time. And this is Mundaka Upanishad 2 and verse 6 now. And now this verse says, "Within the lotus of the heart he dwells, where, like the spokes of a wheel, in its hub the nerves meet. Meditate on him as Om. Easily may you cross the sea of darkness." Very nice. So, of course, by him, what is being stated is God. This is God who's being spoken of here. So, within the lotus of the heart, that is the Hridaya, the Anahata Chakra, Hridaya. There are several words for this region, the heart region, where we know that in accordance with the yoga system, in accordance with the Upanishads, and indeed all of the teachings of Sanatana Dharma, it is within the heart region that we ourselves as Atman, this is where we are within the body itself. This also is where Paramatman is, where God is as well. So what this is saying is that we are indeed to meditate upon God who is there within the heart. I've given talks in the past where I've spoken very, very deeply about this, about God within the heart and how we are to meditate upon God within the heart. So this is a very simple verse. Actually, we're not going to spend a long time talking about this, where it's essentially saying the same thing. Meditate on him, that is, meditate on God as Om. Now, this part is especially of great importance because this confirms what we were saying a short time ago when I was talking earlier about what is the nature of Om. Om is one of the names of God. Again, just like Narayana, Krishna, Rama, Govinda, or any other name of God that we can think of. It is one of the names of God. That being the case, the names of God being non-different from God, Om also is non-different from God. So thus, when we are meditating upon the mantra, upon the sound vibration, Om, we are quite literally presencing God. We are in the presence of God as a result of saying this mantra. So thus, meditate on him, on God, as Om. Om is God, God is Om. The only difference being that God is the locus of divine personality, the supreme personality of Godhead, to quote Prabhupada, versus Om is the name of that being. But again, in the case of God, name and person are one. That's not the case for us. We all have our individual name that was given to us by our parents, most likely, but our name could have been anything. Our name and we are not literally ontologically one. With God, on the other hand, God's names and God are one and the same. So again, this little verse here is saying this. And then finally, easily may you cross the sea of darkness. So this is a beautiful way that this verse ends, actually, is by explaining to us that indeed, by following this process of meditating upon Om, that is, meditating upon the names of God, and again, I need to say, by extension, not merely Om itself, but any of these revealed mantras in which Om is also there. Om Namo Narayanaya, for example, being the primary of these. By doing this, we achieve liberation. We may cross the sea of darkness. So where we are presently in ignorance, in illusion, operating as a result of ahankara, as a result of false ego, we find ourselves in a state of really darkness. where we don't really know anything. If you're in darkness, you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are, you don't know what's around you, you don't know the nature of reality, you don't know where you're going or where you've been. If you're in darkness, you cannot know anything, and not knowing anything, you cannot achieve anything of importance. Well, in the same way, when we are in illusion, we are in darkness. And what this verse is very nicely saying is that when indeed we meditate upon the names of God with devotion, with the idea of being with God, of having God realization, etc., then it is by doing this that we easily cross that sea of darkness and that we arrive in that realm of light, in Vaikuntha itself. Very nice. So with that, I'm going to stop here. 3 wonderful verses talking about the nature of Om. And I thank you very much for listening to my discourse. And now I would like to take any questions that people have, either about these verses or about Sanatana Dharma in general. It could be about anything related to Vedic spirituality. So again, with that, I will leave it up to you. Everyone, please feel free to ask your questions. I'll give people just a little bit of time because I know it takes a little bit of time before the questions begin to arrive, etc. And I see that there are some questions that are coming right now, fast and furious. So give me a moment, please, to look at some of these questions. Very good. Here is a good question from Rudra Stormbringer. And he says, Jaya Shri Guru, is the M in the mantra Om an M sound, so an actual M sound, or is it a Ng sound? I've heard some people say that the diamond mark on top of the symbol means it should be NG instead of M. Very good question. As far as the actual pronunciation, it really is neither. It is in Sanskrit. In Devanagari, it is its own thing. It is not an M per se, but at the same time, it's not pronounced as in Narasingha. It's not pronounced in the same way as that. Rather, it is a nasal sound vibration. So, that is precisely how it sounds. So I hope that answers the question. Very good. Here's a very nice question from Chris Kramer. Pranam teacher Sri Acharyaji. Is there a concept in Vedic spirituality of aligning our will with the will of Narayana? Or is that an Abrahamic perspective? For example, being a servant of Bhagavan. A good question. And actually, yes, indeed. The idea is that with self-surrender, we are indeed trying to align our will with God's will. This is not just an Abrahamic concept, actually. At the same time, I need to explain that what that means is not that we literally lose our will, lose our ability to have free will or anything like that. We don't become an automaton. It's not our goal to become just kind of a robotic automaton in the service of God, even in the service of God. But rather, we always have our free will, and indeed, the very act of surrender itself would not be possible without free will. It is free will itself that serves as the very foundation, the very, let's say, psychological basis, the very mental basis for being able to surrender to God. So it's not that we lose our free will in aligning our will with God. Rather, freely and openly, what we say is, what our mentality is, that yes, I have my free will. In theory, I will always be able to choose what I wish to do. But I am so devoted to God, to Narayana, to the point where I choose that whatever you will, I know that that will is perfect, so therefore I acquiesce to your will. So if that makes sense. So again, it's not that we give up our ability to will freely, but no, actually on the contrary, through our free will, we pray to God that may my will always be aligned with yours, because I know that your will is perfect. So I hope that makes sense and that explains that a little bit. Now give me a few moments, please, because there are many questions that came streaming in, so I want to read some of these. Here's a good question, actually. And the question is, good evening, Sri Acharyaji. If one has lost all ability to stand normal people, quote unquote, should one restrict respect and friendship to highly advanced spiritual persons and to detach oneself from normies? Very good question. Very good question. And let me answer this in this way. First of all, when it comes to the idea of an individual who maybe is, let's say, a little bit more spiritually advanced or more wise, or who's in some way or another stands out from the rest of society. And then when they look about them and they see that the majority of people are indeed what we would call normies. And indeed, this is something that's been recognized historically in so many spiritual traditions, that individuals who reach a certain state of wisdom, they will look around them and realize that, all right, I'm not like the majority of people. The majority of people, sadly, tend to be materialistic. They tend to be somewhat sheep-like in their decision-making. That is, whatever the authorities tell them, whatever the media tells them, whatever anyone in any state of authority tells them, that's kind of what they do, etc. Most people are not free thinkers, and on and on and on. So it's kind of normal that if you're a spiritual person, you will see this. Now, the question is, seeing what is an obvious empirical phenomenon, what do you now do with this knowledge? You see, some individuals will, again, make this distinction between themselves and the vast majority of individuals, and they will become arrogant as a result. And indeed, they will, in their own minds, kind of separate themselves from others. But again, it will be done in a very arrogant way, where they will look down upon many people who otherwise are pretty innocent, just not very deep, without understanding that, yes, while the majority of people might be quote-unquote normies, they are where they are because this is what they have chosen to be, and this is where they find themselves on the path in their specific individual journey. Some people are less advanced than us. Some people are much more advanced than us. Whatever is the given situation, this is the thing that's of importance, is that we have compassion for all people, regardless of where we find them. So this is what's important. Understanding that indeed you may be different from the majority of others, don't allow this to be more fuel for false ego and for self-aggrandizement and for just thinking yourself better than others. Because trust me, if you follow that route, soon enough, your wisdom will be lost and you'll be just like the normies. You'll just be an egotistical, self-centered person like everyone else. Rather, what we are to do as truly spiritual people in a positive way is indeed to recognize, if it is the case, to recognize that yes, indeed, I may have a deeper understanding of the nature of reality than the majority of people. My interests are different. You know, they want to go to bars and drink beer and watch sports and listen to gossip, or whatever the latest celebrities are doing, and they listen to every single thing that the media tells them, and on and on and on. You know, you may recognize that that is the case with most people and that you possibly are not like that. But this being the case, what you are to now do positively is indeed to, first of all, thank God that this is the case and be very grateful, and to always say to yourself, there but for the grace of God go I. In other words, we could have been normies too, quote unquote normies. We could have been individuals who were kind of unthinking as well. But somehow or other, by God's grace, I have a little bit more insight than others. Be grateful for that. Do not become egotistical. Do not use this as, again, an excuse to just feed your ego, but rather have compassion upon those individuals who, yes, they may be quote unquote normal people, not very deep thinkers, but a lot of them are quite innocent. A lot of them are good people nonetheless. You see, this is the thing, is I would, again, for myself, I would rather associate with a quote unquote normie who is a good and ethical and loving person than someone who is deeply philosophical but arrogant. And just someone who is an ugly person as a result, inwardly. So the truth of the matter is, we need to have compassion toward all people, even if we understand that, yes, I'm different, I see things in a deeper sort of way. Again, we are to have compassion toward those who are not in that state. So I hope that makes sense. Very nice. Here's an important question, actually. And it is, Sri Acharyaji, how does one move beyond all the skepticism, second guessing, and doubt, and into a solid faith that goes beyond mental assent to actual influence on your actions in day-to-day life? Very good question. And this is going to be the answer. It's not an easy answer. There is no easy answer, but this is the answer. It is via practice. And more, it's via experience. You see, when an individual is skeptical or, let's say, untrusting or doubtful about anything, about, let's say, a person or any kind of phenomena within this world, why is that the case for the most part? It's because they don't really understand that thing, that phenomenon, that person, etc. very well at all. Rather, they need to experience. And then in that experience, they now have a basis for faith, for the opposite of doubt, etc., all these things that you've mentioned here. So this is what I would tell you, is that indeed, if this is you, if you tend to be somewhat skeptical, have a lot of doubt, etc., as much as is possible, redouble your efforts to surround yourself with the spiritual. This is number one. Redouble your efforts to surround yourself with the spiritual. What does that mean? Read the Vedic scriptures even more. This means practice meditation even more. Most importantly, it also means to associate with spiritual people even more. Now, when you do all this, this is what will be the result. You will begin to gain experience. Experience of that which you have doubt in. You will begin to experience your true self. You will begin to experience inner peace. You will begin to experience wisdom in practical application. You will begin to experience the presence of God. And all this being the case, it is now as a result of that actual experience, that subjective experience that you are now experiencing of truth, that doubt, that skepticism will very naturally go away. So this is what I would ask you to do, is, again, these two stages. First of all, redouble what you are doing spiritually, and especially good association. Associate with individuals who themselves are highly spiritual. And then as a result of, again, increasing your sadhana, begin to experience these things, not just theoretically understand, all right, what is the nature of God? What is the nature of my true self? You do need to begin with that. That's very important. You need to have that theoretical framework by which you can now do. But then with that theoretical framework and now doing, that is doing meditation, sadhana, association, etc., what then happens is you have experience. You begin to experience God. You begin to experience transcendent states. You begin to experience the actual words of the Vedic scriptures in your own life, not just on paper. But you begin to replicate these things in your own life. As a result, you cannot but have faith, and the doubt will go away. So I hope that was helpful. Here's a nice question from The Way. Acharyaji, how does an individual discover their personal dharma in its fullness? Is it revealed, or is it something that comes through seeking? Thank you. One's svadharma, one's own personal dharma. First, let me explain that the word dharma itself has several different applications. It means dharma as in natural law, speaking very, very generally. But also what it means is one's svadharma. When you hear this term svadharma, what this means is that every individual also has their own dharma, that is, their own essential nature. Used in terms of svadharma, it means one's own, sva literally means one's own essential nature. And everyone has their own essential nature. And this is a combination of one's psychophysical nature, coupled with one's free will, ability, etc., etc. And so what you're asking is, how does one know this? Is it revealed to a person, or does it just come through seeking? It is both, actually. It is both. Truthfully, ideally, if you can find an individual who is spiritually advanced enough and who is wise enough, who can come to know you as a person and reveal this to you, that's the best. To find such a person, of course, is very difficult. That's a guru. That's a guru. That's an individual who, again, will come to know you, know your inner nature, etc., over a period of time, and who will tell you, oh, this is your svadharma. You are an individual who your inner qualities are like that of a kshatriya, for example, of a warrior, or like a priest, a brahmana, and on and on. And then, whatever combinations there are therein. So this is the best way, but the truth of the matter is, of course, to find such an individual today is very difficult. So this is why I've told people that in the absence of such a personal presence in your life, then a person with a lot of effort, with a lot of self-reflection, introspection, a lot of self-honesty, they can come to the point where they can themselves understand their own svadharma. Indeed, I've met people like this. I meet people like this all the time, who they just have a good understanding of who they are, what their likes and dislikes are, what the patterns have been throughout their life on this earth. And they have very little difficulty understanding, oh yes, this is my svadharma, this is my own inner nature. So again, it really depends on the individual. In some cases, a person can know somewhat easily, just kind of on their own. With other people, they can know on their own, but it will take a longer period of time. And again, a lot of introspection. But the very best thing is indeed if you can find an individual who can help to reveal this unto you, or at the very least, if you yourself begin to have a very good inkling of what your own inner nature is like, who can confirm that for you. So I hope that answers the question. It's not either or. It really depends on the individual and their own insight as far as their own individual nature. Very good. At this point, please forgive me. I was going in order of questions, but now I'm skipping a whole bunch of them just because, as always, I try to be fair to people who ask questions much later. Otherwise, people who ask questions later would never have a chance to get their questions answered. So I'm kind of going down the list of questions a little bit. So if I am skipping your question, please don't take it personally. I want to kind of give everyone a nice chance to have their questions answered. So please give me a moment as I look through these. Good. Here is a nice question concerning yoga, actually, and this is from John. And he asks, I practice karma and bhakti yoga. I am wondering, Sri Acharyaji, how can I practice the other two yogas, or is it necessary? Yes, that is a very good question, actually. The truth of the matter is, and I've spoken about this, if you read my one book called Sanatana Dharma, The Eternal Natural Way, toward the beginning of that book, I actually go very in-depth into what is the true nature of yoga and how it is meant to be a fully integrated path. So thus, when we speak about these various separate yogas, especially specifically as found in the Bhagavad Gita, which is what I assume you're referring to when you talk about the other two yogas as well. When we look at the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita very specifically, yes, we have Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and then this unnamed yoga, which really everyone recognizes as either Raja or Ashtanga Yoga, which is the same thing. We are meant to practice all four of these in an integrated manner. The truth of the matter is these are not really separate yogas. They are different aspects of yoga that can be seen and understood in accordance with their own individual natures as yogas. But the truth of the matter is we're meant to follow all four simultaneously. So what is the full yoga system? It is a yoga system in which indeed we aspire to acquire wisdom. So therefore, this is Jnana Yoga. And this includes reading the Vedic scriptures. This includes understanding the rules and procedures of logic and having a very rational, very logical, very sharp mind. It includes the cultivation of wisdom itself, not merely factual knowledge, but knowledge that is in itself of the nature of the eternal. So therefore, wisdom. So we're meant to practice Jnana Yoga in this way. We are also meant to practice Karma Yoga in that we make all of our activities, including the activities that we perform in this material world, into a type of meditation in motion, where we cultivate detachment and we cultivate the idea of everything positive that we do in this world, everything that is sattvic that we do not merely for ourselves, so therefore creating karma, but rather we do as a dedication to God, so thus transcending karma. That is Karma Yoga. I'm going to skip Bhakti for now. I'm going to talk about that last. Next, there is, again, the Ashtanga system. And with the Ashtanga system, this includes all of the technical aspects of yoga, all of which are important. Again, even as Vaishnavas, we practiced Ashtanga Yoga. We do asanas, we do pranayama, we follow the yamas and niyamas, we do dharana, we do, again, all of these things. So indeed, we are to practice the Ashtanga system. And then finally, we are to practice the full yoga system in such a way that it is permeated throughout with bhakti, with devotion, and with the idea of devotion itself being not merely a tool of transcendence, but the transcendental goal itself. So it's in this way that we practice yoga in an integrated way. So to answer your question perfectly, indeed, I would recommend that you practice not just karma and bhakti yoga, indeed, not even just bhakti yoga, but that if you have the time, if you have the inclination, and indeed if you have proper guidance, that you practice the full yoga system as much as you can as time affords. Very good. So hopefully that answers that question. And again, so many questions here that I am forced to, unfortunately, skip a few of them. Very good. This is a four-part, I believe, more statement than anything. So I can't address the entire thing only because we are getting close to running out of time. But let me at least address the very first of this four-part statement. And it is Namaste Acharya-ji, a follower of Christ here. So strange to see one of the truest sources of God-loving wisdom in modern times comes from a religion, I think you're saying, foreign to the religion that this country was built on. Very good. And again, just due to time, I can't really read the rest of what you say here. Let me just say that since you are a follower of Christ, as you say, first of all, welcome. You're welcome to certainly come to our channel and learn as much as you can, both about Sanatana Dharma, this very ancient tradition, and about Christ himself, actually, because if you stick to our channel long enough, you're actually going to learn much more about even Jesus himself than you would imagine. And let me just say that on the one hand, I understand what you're saying. On the other hand, is it really surprising? Such is the nature of God that nothing is beyond the scope of what God can do. God quite literally is everywhere, and there is no such thing as a foreign religion or anything like this when we see things from God's perspective. Rather, what God recognizes is whether we are devotees of God, whether we are devoted to God, not merely what we call ourselves in a sectarian sense. Who is God more pleased with? Someone who calls himself a Christian but in no way whatsoever is following in the footsteps of Christ? Or someone who calls himself a follower of Sanatana Dharma, but who recognizes that Jesus was one of the greatest sages in all time, and we indeed live our lives in such a way that a Christian looking upon us would call us Christ-like, because indeed we endeavor in our own lives to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, and like him, to love God, to love our neighbor, and to be as virtuous and ethical as possible, and to try to save this world. So indeed, again, I can understand what you're saying about the seemingly foreign nature of our religion vis-a-vis the, let's say, the Christianity of America or Europe, etc. But at the same time, there's nothing foreign about Sanatana Dharma really whatsoever. So with that, I hope you understand the nature of my comment to you. Very good. All right, I'm looking at the time, and sadly, I'm very tempted to continue taking questions, but sadly, I need to stop here because, again, we're almost out of time. We have less than 2 minutes. Now we have less than a minute, actually. So I want to, again, thank you all very much for being here. I hope that you derived some good information and some inspiration from tonight's live stream satsangha. If you can, again, if you have not yet done so, please subscribe to our channel, the Dharma Nation channel on YouTube. We also have channels on many other video platforms as well, including BitChute and Rumble and Odyssey. If you just look at the description of this video, you will see where you can connect with us on all social media: Twitter, Gab, Facebook, Telegram, and on and on and on. So please, before you leave, take a look at the description of this video and join us on all those other platforms as well. Please like this video if you derived any sort of good information or inspiration from this video. When you have a chance, please visit our main website, dharmacentral.com. You will see our books available there that go much more in depth into the philosophy of Sanatana Dharma. You'll see that we have an email list there as well that you can feel free to join. If you would like to become a member of the International Sanatana Dharma Society, if you just look on the menu, you'll see information for how you can do that as well. So with that, I again thank you for being here, and namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Om Hri Om. And with that, everyone, until the next time that we meet, I ask you to all please take very good care of yourselves.